Resuming debate, the honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to share my time with a member from Calgary, Shepherd. I'm happy to be able to do that with him tonight. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've just listened to some debate tonight about how well we're all getting along here, and I don't want to change the tone too far here tonight, but I think we need to talk about the fact that this government has been naive right from the beginning. When Stéphane Dion went to Myanmar in 2016, he gave them $44 million, and that was intended to go, we were told, to build democratic institutions. Well, if the government at the time had been paying attention to what was going on in Myanmar, they would have known there were already serious problems there. The election had been held a little bit earlier, and there was no indication from the election that any of the parties were going to take seriously this issue around the Rohingya. And we understand it's a long-lasting issue, and I'm going to go into that in a few minutes. But the reality is the government that was elected in Burma was not taking this issue seriously. Our government walked in there and said, we're going to give you $44 million. There's been little accountability for that money. And actually, if I go on the website, international.gc tonight, under Canada International Assistance in Myanmar, this is still the government's position, that the Myanmar is moving towards an inclusive parliamentary democracy and that's negotiating ceasefires after decades-long civil wars. Now, Mr. Speaker, I guess I can understand if they haven't kept their websites up, but they should be, because this is an important issue and one that the government has misfired on right from the beginning. And the second place that it made a mistake was last week when the Prime Minister was in New York. He had an opportunity to show some international leadership. He chose to talk about, as much as possible, whatever dirty laundry he could find from our country, rather than taking leadership on international issues. And this would have been an excellent issue for him to have shown some leadership and statesmanship. We've talked tonight about members of the Subcommittee on Human Rights who've been talking about this issue off and on for the last year. We've worked very well together on the issue, but the government leadership needs to start paying attention to these kinds of issues. And he had the chance to do that. Didn't take it, it seems, until it hits the editorial page in Canada. This government pays little attention to it. And because of that, Mr. Speaker, they have little influence. They don't have the capacity to influence in the way that they should. Now, we know a little bit about the Rohingya issue. It's been going on for a long time. It's a group of people who, within the last several hundred years, have moved into this area on the border of Bangladesh and what was called Burma, but Myanmar now. And they can be shown to have a heritage that goes back in the area for several hundred years. In 2015, their population in Myanmar was about 1 million people. There's been a long and drawn-out persecution of them. It started many years ago, but there were military crackdowns in 1998, which chased a whole pile of the Rohingya people out of Myanmar and into Bangladesh. When they came back in 1981, they started moving back into the area that they had occupied and lived in for so long. The government turned on them, and they brought in a series of citizenship laws that basically removed their citizenship from them. And so there was another round, actually, of persecution in 1991 and 92, and then renewed pressure in 2012, and then what we see here in just the past future. I'd like to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the problem, and it is really centered around these 1982 citizenship laws, because basically in the past the Rohingya had been citizens of the country, and the government just made a decision that they were going to remove their position as citizens. And so they came in with this law that said that citizens need to be part of a recognized national race, and Rohingya were not a national recognized race. So right off from the back, basically, they did not have an opportunity to reaffirm their citizenship. And then it said they had to be able to demonstrate that their families had settled there before 1823, which is when the British come. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, the records and other things made it very, very difficult for people to be able to establish the fact that they were citizens. And so they were basically left stateless in 1982 by those changes. And there have been pressure over the year on the government to try to get them to change that position so that these people would be considered citizens again, but that has not been successful. And basically, they just qualified it. That made it impossible for the Rohingya then to qualify as citizens. The ones that were actually impacted in 2015 around the election. I'll talk a little bit about that later, because I know someone who was impacted by that personally. 2015, there were some other changes made as well, and they were called the Race and Religion Protection Laws. There were 4 laws that were brought in, and they each actually impacted directly on the Rohingya minority that exists in Myanmar. There's a monogamy law that basically ruled out polygamy, which is practiced in certain areas of that country. They had a religious conversion law and an interfaith law where people who wanted to change their faith actually needed to get approval, and they needed to go through interviews and then wait between 90 to 180 days before they were allowed to convert, and in many cases they were not. So, and that the fourth law, or the third law actually restricted the marriage of Buddhist women to non-Buddhist men, so put restrictions on them. And the fourth law was a population control law, which basically was applied to designated areas, and it was targeted at minority areas where they were only allowed to have one child every 36 months. So these, piled on top of the citizenship laws, basically left the Rohingya without representation and without any political strength. There were further restrictions that were placed on things like employment, education, freedom of movement, and their religious freedom as well. And so these violate the basic rights of people in so many ways. I want to tell you just about a specific answer, or a specific case from 2015. I had the chance to be a part of a group, an international group of parliamentarians who were formed around the issues of religious freedom. And we were in Oslo in the fall of 2014, signed on to a charter onto this group. It's called IPP4. There was a gentleman there from Myanmar whose name was Shui Mong. He was a member of parliament from Burma, and he came to the meeting and he signed on to this charter that we had set in place, and we now have 150, 200 members from around the world as part of that network. He's a full citizen. 2010 he had citizenship, and when they came to vote in 2015, the Electoral Commission decided that his parents had not been citizens, and he was not a citizen either, and so they removed his citizenship. There were 500,000 Rohingyas who were in the same situation, who were struck from the electoral roll. So, Mr. Speaker, these were people who voted in one election. And as we led up to the next election, the Electoral Commission of the central government made a determination that we're going to say that they're not citizens anymore. So Mr. Mong went from representing his country as a member of Parliament, in Parliament, to finding himself completely stateless. He's in the United States now with an arrest warrant out for him. I'm sorry, my time's going quickly here, I see, Mr. Speaker, but this is the kind of pressure that the Rohingyas have been under in Myanmar. Now, I just want to talk a little bit, just for a minute, about the August 23rd. Kofi Annan came out with his report this year. August 25th, there's a small group of blamed on the Rohingya, perhaps some Rohingyas in it, but it seems like a kind of a strange group of people who attacked a number of government and police crossings, killed a number of people, and that caused a retaliation from the military and the start of all that we've seen now. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that the government's response by the 28th was to begin laying mines. And we've got a news release from the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, and they talk very specifically about mines being placed. On the afternoon of August 28th, an army truck arrives on the Myanmar side of the border. They unload 3 crates from which they took anti-personnel mines and placed them in the ground from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It talks about the areas where they were placed. It talks about subsequent to the daytime operation, the Myanmar Army brought trucks at night to continue laying mines, which could be seen under the lights. And this has all been confirmed actually by Bangladeshi authorities as well. So we know that it's taken place against basically every international protocol that exists in the world. Mr. Speaker, we need to find some solutions here quickly, and I think, first of all, they need immediate help. We were told at subcommittee just a few days ago that there are places where people are surrounded. They're kept into compounds. They've eaten all the food. They've eaten the trees. They've eaten the branches. There's nothing for them to eat. They need immediate assistance and help from outside, or they are going to starve to death. So starvation is imminent. It's taking places. We heard tonight earlier about the rapes and the killings. We need to insist that the military stop their campaign. They need to stop it. We also need to be clear and to do a solid investigation as to which foreign powers are funding and radicalizing these individuals. Where is this small group of people who, by the way, are killing Rohingya Muslims as well, getting their backing in order to cause the disruption that they've caused? I think we need to insist that they replace the 4 race and religion protection laws and revoke those 1982 citizenship laws. This government needs to take its place as a leadership. They need to quit the show and start supplying the go, because up till now, that has not been the case. Canadians need value for that $50 million that they've spent there. This government needs to be accountable, needs to step in and show the leadership that the Rohingya and the Myanmar people need in order to move forward.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Mississauga Lakeshore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Cypress Hills Grasslands for his impassioned speech, for his leadership on that issue, and for his participation in the debate here tonight. Mr. Speaker, over the course of the past year, my constituents have written to me and have called me on this issue, constituents that belong to the Islamic Society of North America, the Association of Progressive Muslims, Christians, people from all walks of life, faith-based and from other circles in our community. And they've expressed outrage that there is yet another community, the Rohingya, in a relatively forgotten part of the world, subject to such atrocities, to such slaughter. And they've asked me to step up and to show them what we can do as parliamentarians. And this is my question for my colleague from Cypress Hills Grasslands. You spoke of leadership. And, Mr. Speaker, in just a few weeks, the 137th Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union will take place in St. Petersburg, Russia. Traditionally, upside of 120, sometimes 140 or 150 parliamentary delegations from around the world to discuss issues like democracy, like human rights. And I'd like to ask my colleague what he thinks international fora such as the Inter-Parliamentary Union could contribute to such an acute crisis like the crisis of the Rohingya, and what opportunity this House of Commons could have with a united voice to inject itself into that dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Thank my colleague for the question. I think it's a well thought out question, and I think these international fora are an incredibly important part of where we need to be addressing these issues. I mentioned the United Nations last week. I think we missed an opportunity there. I wouldn't like to see that same issue missed at the IPU. I had a chance to go to Myanmar a year ago last August, and we went in there, and it was obvious from being there that there was really no one who was interested in solving this problem. The government wasn't all that concerned with solving it, it didn't appear. We met with actually some of the national politicians from Rakhine State. They were definitely not interested in taking the Rohingya side on this thing. So it's going to take strong international leadership to convince the Myanmar government. And I think we need to mention as well, 25% of the seats in that parliament, I've been in the parliament and watched, are given to the military. So there's an entire section with nothing but military uniforms sitting in that section. There's a section for the opposition and then a section for the government. There needs to be pressure applied not only on those people who have been elected democratically, but also on the military to make or to create some situation where they will do better than they are right now. We had people talking at committee the other day that this is a genocide. It fits the conditions for genocide. And when we asked, are they trying to push them out? Is that? And yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. If we can get them on the other side of the river, we can mine this side of the river. They can't come back. From the Myanmar government's perspective, that takes care of this issue. And we need to do better, and we need to let the international community know that that's not acceptable.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Fredericton. Oh,
Mr. Speaker, thanks to my colleague for his intervention this evening. I think it's important just to clearly put on the record the fact that the Prime Minister discussed solutions for the situation in Myanmar in his meetings with counterparts at the UN last week. I've heard a number of counterparts talk about how this wasn't the case, and I think it needs to be clearly stated that there were significant and serious conversations had at the UNGA by both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs about how Canada can continue to play a leading role in helping find a solution for the current crisis with the Rohingya in the Rakhine State, where Canada was one of the first countries in the world to step up and provide assistance. At the same time, I think the support that Canada is providing to see Myanmar democratize, to embrace pluralism is important, and that should be a stated goal of global affairs in Canada, of this government. And I would hope that the member opposite would share the view that Myanmar should be and we should be doing everything we can to help Myanmar work towards democracy and an embrace of diversity, inclusion, and pluralism. I wonder if he has a comment to that effect.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills in 60 seconds or less.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not good enough for the Prime Minister to be silent publicly on an issue that's so critically important around the world. When we speak out, that demonstrates the leadership that we need to see and we need to have. And we talked a little bit earlier this evening about funding and the funding going to the Myanmar government. I think some of his own colleagues talked about, perhaps it was the minister even talked about the necessity of making sure that that money is accounted for, but perhaps not going directly to the government, because we don't know where that's going to be spent, but given to NGOs that right now we have an incredible need for a humanitarian need for food, medical assistance into those camps that are just on the border there. Perhaps that's the place that we should be putting our money right now, rather than giving anything to the Myanmar government until we're absolutely certain of how they're going to use that money. Clearly, the $44 million went somewhere, and we don't seem to have any accountability for where that money is. If the government's got a good idea and can explain that, we'd certainly be glad to hear that.
Resuming